Thank you everybody for joining us today on our webinar. We will have Melissa and John presenting our update for the week. We do ask that you keep your mics muted during the presentation and use the chat feature to ask questions. And Melissa and John will address them at the end of the presentation. And with that, I will turn this over to John Longstreet and Melissa.
Thank you, Hope, and thanks everyone for tuning in again today. We have a lot of news this week, so I'm going to keep my intro very short, and I'll be back later to give you updates on a few other things. I do want to remind you that this webinar today is a service provided by PRLA for the restaurant, lodging, and travel and tourism industry. It is off the record. We're happy to do any press interviews at any time. But if there's anyone from the press on this call today, we ask them to disconnect, and we'll talk with you later about anything that you may have on your mind. So with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa Bova. Melissa, thank you.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. As you can see, John was worried that I was just a faceless voice to all of you. So we're videoing this week. We'll see how it goes. And if I go missing, it means my dog knocked over the table that my computer is currently sitting on. So I apologize in advance. All right, I'm caffeinated. Let's get started with federal, which is probably what I'm going to be spending the least amount of time on today. I know the questions will start coming swift and sure, and I will tell you the same thing that I told a lot of you last week. We don't have a lot of the answers yet, and I'll go over a little bit of that now. Yesterday, the process began to refund the PPP, the P3 short version, and the EIDL loans, the emergency disaster loans. That is passed in the Senate, and it's to the tune of $483 billion. $320 billion is dedicated to the P3, and $60 billion is dedicated to those economic injury disaster loans, those EIDL loans, as we've been calling them. All they did yesterday, and that the House will do today, is put more money in those pots. None of the rules have changed. None of the requirements have changed. The 501c6s still are not eligible for the P3. That's why I answered that now, because I know I get that question every week. Nothing has changed in terms of the restrictions and the requirements and the use of either loan, except the fact that they're putting more money into it. That's a key part in all of this. So nothing's changed. All of the headaches and the trials and tribulations and the parts of the P3 that make no sense and are completely not applicable to our current operations, none of that has been addressed in this. This is purely a refunding mechanism that will start, will be passed today, hopefully in the House. The president has said he will sign it, and it will open up the process for these applications at the end of the week. 2 points I want to make. One, if you've applied for a P3 and you're in limbo, from what we are hearing, this just starts moving those applications through the process again. I would still check with your bank, and I'm going to touch on the banking thing again in a moment. I would still check with your bank and make sure that your application is still in the queue, but most banks are basically picking up where they left off in terms of processing of applications. For the EIDL loans, there are some questions there that we don't know the answer to yet. I know some of you have started to receive your EIDL, and to say that the amount of loan that you were given does nothing for you might be an understatement. I know some of you are getting loans as small as $35,000 when you were looking upwards of $250,000 for operations. We do not know how the $60 billion is going to be handled by the SBA, if it's going to allow them to increase funds to applicants who've already received some funding, or if it's entirely for new applicants. So before you ask that question, the answer is we don't know the answer yet. I will say this in terms of the P3, and this has kind of been something that I know many of you have been frustrated about. I've gotten a lot of questions. How does the 75-25% split work? How do I make sure I'm covered? What's included, what's not included? We'll get to the unemployment. I think that's this week's topic of the week as well. We'll get to that in a minute. The P3, the problem is that the feds put in their guidelines, Treasury said in their guidelines, it is up to your financial institution to determine if you've met the requirements of the law. It's not the SBA, it's not the Treasury. They are saying it's up to your financial institution. So it's frustrating, and I know some of your financial institutions have not given you a clear answer, but it is up to them to determine if that 75-25 split is being met by you or not. So please keep talking to your banks and have those conversations. If something changes, we'll let you know. But right now, at the end of that 8 weeks, that loan forgiveness is determined by the financial institution, not the Treasury in and of itself. As I said, we are refunding. There is obviously a huge recognition that there will need to be what we're calling a COVID 4.0 or maybe a CARES Act 2+. You could call it anything. Congress will be returning to session. We expect the beginning of May, and conversations will continue in terms of getting more funding and relief to businesses and nonprofits. 501c6s will be part of that conversation, making them eligible for P3 loans or other loans. Additional funding, maybe extensions of the P3 to go beyond 8 weeks will be part of that discussion in May. Business interruption insurance relief, which we'll talk a little bit about on the state level in a moment. As I said last week, insurance companies are saying, yeah, we'd love to provide relief, but we don't actually want to pay for it. So let's call it a relief fund, and then we don't have to pay anything out. That will be part of COVID 4. But I want to caveat all of that with the acknowledgement and the push for all of you when we're doing grassroots pushes to engage, because this is not going to be like the CARES Act. This is not going to be everybody recognizes the crisis, everybody needs to fund everything immediately. We're going to be right back into that political rabbit hole of Republicans and Democrats fighting over different priorities all over again once we get to this COVID 4 package. So the grassroots, the stories that are going to need to be told to your congressional delegation, to our US senators, is going to be more important than ever, because we are going to get caught in a lot of political crosshairs as we move forward with a CARES package. So that's kind of where we are on the federal level. And like I said, the refunding should go to the president today. And I'll add one more item out there for the P3. If you haven't pulled the money yet, you might have an option to return it, because I know we had completely different guidance when this was passed, and now we are receiving the fund and the guidance has changed. You don't get to pick your 8 weeks. You have to use it within 10 days. For some of you, and like I said, I will spend some time on the unemployment front, can't even get your employees back. You need to think about if this is still the right step for you. And I mentioned this last week. You need to determine that. We can't tell you what to do. But if you don't think it's going to work, you might have the option to return the loan if you haven't drawn on it at this point in time. In addition, if you need the loan, if you know you're going to use the loan, this $320 extra billion, I mean, we lost 350 in about a week to 2 weeks. This is not going to last forever. I think there will be a refunding, but if you know you're going to use the P3, you might want to consider at least getting your application in the pipeline at this point in time, because we just don't know when more funds will be put into that as we enter into that more political world of packages, recovery packages for everybody. Okay, next slide, Eric. And now I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about some economic impact results and the Pennsylvania restaurant promise while I drink some coffee.
Thank you, Melissa. We've been doing impact studies throughout the crisis, and the most recent one was released on Monday, and we did a press release around that. And this one was compiled by the National Restaurant Association, but it was about Pennsylvania restaurants. We've done these about the hotel business as well. We just don't have an updated one this week. But what we found out from this, and the key numbers are 96% of restaurant operators have laid off people or furloughed them. And of those 96%, they've said the average reduction is 85%. So in other words, they've reduced their team by 85% at 96% of the restaurants. So it's significant. It's definitely greater than anyone anticipated, and it's greater even than we anticipated going into that. That means that there is in excess of 300,000 just restaurant employees that have been furloughed since that time. The last time we did our informal survey with hotels, we estimated about 50% of the hotels were either closed or virtually closed. And of those that were operating, there's about a 10% occupancy. So obviously the furloughs in hotels have been significant as well. And maybe an even more disturbing statistic is that about 1,000 restaurant operators thus far in Pennsylvania have either taken the action or anticipate taking the action over the next 30 days to determine that they're not going to reopen at all. And that's just as of this moment. So this is information that's really important for us to continue to get to our state and federal legislators so they understand the severity of the problem. It's certainly much worse than anybody anticipated, to make sure that we can get the help that the restaurants need so that they can survive this, both restaurants and hotels, so there's a place for employees to come back to work afterwards. So if you didn't see our press release that came out on Monday, it's up on the website. Take a look at that. The other thing that has happened, there's been a lot of talk about reopening. In fact, it started in a big way last week when the president introduced the Reopening America Again plan and laid out gates, potential gating methods for when certain businesses could reopen and at what level. There's 3 phases to the gating, and then there's that determines when you can open, and then there's 3 phases to the opening. They're general guidelines, and certainly there was an acknowledgement that each state will have the ability to, and in fact, they control how the decisions are being made. Governor Wolf since then also rolled out a plan for Pennsylvania, a general plan, and also pushed back the beginning of the opening till May 8th, which was supposed to be April 30th. We believe, based on discussions we've had, that when the reopening happens, it'll happen in a rolling fashion, similar to how the shelter-in-place worked in a rolling fashion. And our guess is that it will be based on the gating requirements that the CDC and the federal government have outlined. You've seen that in the president's plan, and it's also up on our website. So what the PRLA did in the meantime is reached out to the governor's office, said we'd like to be engaged as opening standards are developed. Of course, hotels are still open, and they've adopted new standards of sanitation based largely on recommendations from our partners at the HNLA. The restaurants, except for delivery and takeout, are closed. And so we wanted to make sure that as they reopen, that we could have sensible and yet safe measures for reopening that took operational considerations into consideration. Mike Brunel, the governor's chief of staff, was open to that and said, getting subject matter expert opinions to help us guide that is a good idea. So the PRLA pulled together what we called the Reopening Task Force, which included mostly restaurateurs from across the state, but also some hoteliers and some caterers, so we could have a good cross section. And Ben on our team served as the liaison to the committee, and the 2 of us met with them on Friday, talked about what we thought our strategy should be, and over the weekend developed a plan with which Ben and Steph and Melissa and I edited, sent it back out to the committee, got their feedback, and then sent it out to the board Sunday night and got all the feedback back from the board on Monday so that we could create what we're calling the Pennsylvania Restaurant Promise. There's 3 purposes for it. You'll see it soon. We're doing a little bit of finishing touches on it before we put it out on the website, and then we'll be creating a, if you will, suitable for framing version that restaurants and hotels can choose to post in their operation. There's 3 purposes for it. The first one of which is to help restaurants with guidelines and best practices as they reopen, and hotel restaurants, of course, too, to make sure that they're providing a safe environment. The second is to reassure the public that restaurants are taking this very seriously and that they're welcoming them back as best they can in a safe and sensible manner. And thirdly, to illustrate to the governor and his team that we are the subject matter experts on this, and we'd like to work with them on the plans to reopen. We submitted this along with a cover letter to the governor on Monday night and received acknowledgement from Chief of Staff Brunel, and he and I have been communicating today about having a follow-up call to talk about next steps as far as the specifics of opening. As you'll see when you see the restaurant promise, it's general guidelines and best practices, and also reassurances to the public of what they can expect in restaurants and what we expect of the public. I think it's a really good, it was really good work by our task force, our board, Melissa, Ben, and Steph over the weekend, and I really appreciate everybody's input on that. We've had terrific response from both board members and task force members on the tone of the document and what we're trying to accomplish, and you'll be seeing this soon. And hot off the press, we also decided just recently that we can very easily convert this into something called the Pennsylvania Hotel Promise too, which includes all of the restaurant information, which is of course important to most hotels that have restaurants and that are right now, but also some of the guidelines that are already being employed for sanitation practices and guest room cleaning and things like that. So we're working on that right now so that a hotel could post that should they desire, to help to reassure their guests and to help set up some operational standards, and so can restaurants. So look for more on that soon. I have to say that I'm encouraged by the response we've received from the governor's office and the need to try to create or try to employ some subject matter expert wisdom into the reopening guidelines to make sure that while they're safe, that it's all going to be driven by health professionals, we know that, and by science, but we can also put some practical application to it too, get the same thing accomplished in a way that might work better for restaurants, for their guests, and for hotels. So with that, Melissa, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, Eric, can we go to the next slide? Okay, let's talk about the governor's announcement this week. On Monday, the days are running together, the governor did make a step further announcement regarding the reopening, I want to put reopening in air quotes, of the economy in Pennsylvania. Part of that order is an extension of that stay-at-home order until May 8th. So all the rules, all the regulations, everything you need to follow now continues to be in place until May 8th. It was supposed to expire April 30th. So non-essential businesses still closed, short-term rentals still can't operate, takeout only for restaurants, hotels can't open their restaurants, they can only do room service. Everything that you've known will continue until May 8th. On May 8th, and we will get more information from the governor potentially next week, and we'll get into the politics of this in a minute, some businesses will reopen. And they will not reopen in the sense of what we expect them to be. This will not be, as I've said, I think the past few weeks, a flipping of a switch. It will potentially be looking at counties where there were only 1 or 2 cases in the entire county and lifting some of those restrictions. It will potentially be allowing maybe more curbside pickup for small businesses that have been forced to close because some people are claiming it's a little disingenuous that the LCB can now do curbside, but so many other small businesses cannot. I'm not always right, but my gut, and I'm not always right because I thought Hillary Clinton was going to win Pennsylvania in 2016. So don't take this 100% correct. I do not anticipate restaurants to be able to reopen for in-house dining on May 8th. And I do not anticipate it to happen even maybe a few weeks after that. So do not, I could be surprised, but I don't anticipate anything that would allow any form of congregating to occur on May 8th. But the numbers really will dictate where we are over the coming weeks. Further to that, beginning on Sunday at 8 o'clock, it was announced last week, we call it the mask order because that's really what it is. And it probably caused about as much frustration as when non-essential and essential businesses were announced and hotels didn't know where they were on that list, because guidance was put out to provide guidelines regarding masks. And further to that point, if there is a case of COVID in your business, what you need to do, what your customers need to do. And if you are a retailer, that document and guidelines made absolutely perfect sense to you. If you were any other type of essential business, it really didn't. So we did get some clarification, and to be honest, we aren't expecting to get much more clarification on a lot of it because they want it to be open-ended. They want the governor, it's one of his favorite talking points is Pennsylvanians need to do the right thing. So generally speaking, all of your employees, if you are open for business, they need to wear a mask. If they have a medical issue, they do not need to wear a mask, but generally all of your employees need to have a mask. If you are a restaurant open for takeout and people are allowed to come in and pick up their order, they need to wear a mask upon entering your establishment. If you do curbside pickup, they're not entering the establishment. I did curbside the other day. They handed it right through the passenger window. I didn't have to wear a mask, and maybe I should have, but it worked out great. It's the entering of the premises that this applies. For my hotels, you're always in the gray area. I think we know this now. I don't mean that as a bad thing, but it's like you're like the redheaded stepchild, which I can say because I'm redheaded. They really didn't provide you guidance generally, and we did get some clarification. So the 50% occupancy rule does not apply to your rooms. God bless you if you have more than 50% occupancy. If you do, the 50% occupancy rule in the announcement does not apply to you. On the mask front, that gets a little shadier. Similar to retailers, when a guest enters the hotel, they should be wearing a mask. If they are not, they should be told that they need a mask. If you have a mask you can provide to them, please provide a mask to them. We are not looking for all of you for you to bodily tackle anybody who says, I'm not wearing a mask. This is not, a WWE fight to do this. At the end of the day, your burden as a business is to ensure people know the law and that they're compliant with it. And if they ignore it, you just do the best that you can to ensure compliance. Further to hotels, your guests should be wearing masks in common areas. They should be wearing it in the lobby. If they go and get ice, they should be wearing masks. If they're not, they should be reminded they should be wearing masks. Do you need a box of masks that you provide them one every time you see them without a mask? No, but the burden is on you to make sure they are aware that they should have a mask. A few other things I just want to clarify because I think this caused some confusion. The temperature checks. There's a requirement regarding temperature checks. This is only if somebody comes in contact or tests positive for the virus in your business. Then you need to do a temperature check. So this is not day to day. Every time your employees show up, you need to take their temperature. The cleaning requirements, the urged 24-hour closures for an infection, only for an infection. So really pay attention, and because you'll need to delineate what you're required to do day to day, and then what you're required to do only if there is an infection or a case of COVID within your establishment. Now, since I've said masks about 30 to 40 times in the last 3 minutes, I will let John speak a little bit to what PRLA is doing to get you some of those masks.
Thank you, Melissa. We've tried to round up as many sources as we can, and those are on our website. They've been there since we first anticipated this was going to happen. And I'll obviously share with you that some of them may not seem like the best sources from a pricing standpoint or availability. It's the best we've been able to do thus far. We also have some larger distributors who have just made themselves available to provide masks, but in most cases, they're 4-week delays, which doesn't help you very much. So we also were able to get a uniform company to agree to provide to folks that work through the PRLA exclusively, and they're not offering it to any other customers outside of their existing national customers. It's a national company, but they will be available to anyone in Pennsylvania through the PRLA website. You don't have to be a member of PRLA, you just have to go to our website and link their website. They should have ready availability. They've been able to get millions of masks apparently to be able to fill the need. And Heidi Howard has been working with them. The link will be set up, we hope, by Friday. They're working very diligently, this company, to get a landing page done. And when you go to our website, you'll be able to link to it, and there'll be all the information you need there to be able to order. They'll be able to deliver in relatively small quantities, I think of 25 masks, and in much larger quantities as well. The pricing we've seen thus far is reasonable, and they're cloth face coverings that are washable and reusable, which is probably the most practical for most restaurants now, because I think you're going to be in the face mask business for a while. So we've had a number of people sending us sources on that. Please keep doing that, even though we're able to get this arrangement made for PRLA and restaurants and hotels in Pennsylvania. If you have other sources, get them to us, because it's quite likely this is going to go on for a while and supply is going to continue to be an issue. Melissa, back to you.
All right, let's get into the guts of all of this and talk about state legislation and everything going on there. Eric, you can go to the next slide. All right. Where do we want? Let's start with unemployment, because every week I think it's going to get better and every week it gets worse. If you are self-employed, I'm sorry. I am sorry about the fact that you have not been able to collect unemployment. And I'm even sorrier that when they opened up the portal, I think about 8 o'clock Friday night, it spent the entire weekend crashing on you to apply for unemployment compensation for my self-employed and gig workers. That's going to continue to happen. The legislature has funneled tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to update the system over the years, and it has just always continued to fall flat. And at a time we need the system to work better than ever, it's just not. So there is no clear answer to that other than you just need to keep on trying. In addition, for everybody who has filed, once you get your PIN, you do need to go back and submit for your first claim. I think there's a misunderstanding that once you receive your PIN, you're done. This is just like putting in your timesheet every week. So every 2 weeks, you need to go in and submit your timesheet. Let's get to, this is probably, I think, for John too, the question that we have gotten all week. And it was from our good governor, who during his address this week to the state, also on Monday, insinuated that if you ask your employees to come back and they decline to come back, you should just pay them more money to get them to come back, and that they don't have to come back unless you pay them more money. That is not true. And we have asked the governor to clarify. We've asked for retraction. We've asked for them to acknowledge the actual state law. And I'm going to go over that with you right now. Under state law, and then we'll get into the gray area. That's COVID, which is everything is gray. Under state law, if you offer an employee, an ex-employee work, and they refuse, you fill out, and it's on here, unemployment compensation form 1921. If you offer them work and they refuse, they are no longer eligible for unemployment compensation. That has not changed. That is still the process you need to go through. With that being said, as more and more businesses potentially would be filling out these forms, we need to make sure that the unemployment office can process them and how quick that processing will be. But there is a form that needs to be filled out if you offer work. The problem that we have, and I got an email question, and I'm sure a few more people will ask it. If your employees say, I don't want to, I'm scared of contracting the virus, in that scenario, they potentially could continue to collect unemployment. I know that this is all of your worst nightmares right now, especially those of you that have a P3 loan and are trying to get your employees to come back and they're just saying, no, thank you. We are working through that, and we'll be working with the governor's office and the legislature to figure out how to process that. The states, we confirmed this in a webinar yesterday, the states have a lot of wiggle room with how they use that extra $600 a week. So they could do a phase down as we get out of the crisis to encourage people to return to work. All of these are options that we can look into. But on its face, if you ask your employees to come back to work and they just say no, they are no longer eligible for unemployment, and you would fill out that form. And we will continue to fight for other options for you as it relates to unemployment. I know this is a nightmare right now. It's one of the unintended consequences of the CARES Act when it was passed, in addition to some of the constraints on you regarding the P3. Sales tax remittance. Most of you are probably quarterly filers. This doesn't apply to you. If you are a larger filer, your prepayment you do not have to pay. That has been stopped for March, April, and May at this point, that prepay that you need to do on the 20th of every month. But you do on the 20th of every month have to remit what you collected the month before. For a lot of you, it's not much. We did ask for a delay in those payments. We understand how important cash flow is, But when you have a state that is looking at least a $4 billion budget deficit, your Department of Revenue tends to push back a lot when you ask for them not to collect taxes for a while. And I will further to that point, Department of Revenue is coming after you if you have not remitted sales tax. If they are, please let us know. We can work through all of that. We very much know that as of April 20th, when you had to remit your March payments, a lot of you didn't because you needed to use that money for payroll. And we understand that. So we'll be working through that process to waive any late fees, any of that as well, to ensure that you're not being penalized for a shutdown that you had no part of. Legislative session, the House and the Senate were in for 2 days this week, and it continued to be, the governor says one thing, the legislature tries to bring it back to center and or pushes back, and then nothing really goes anywhere. And I think we felt that a lot this year in terms of session. A lot of political debates on both sides of the aisle, a lot of Republicans trying to figure out a way to open up businesses. Democrats are lockstep with the governor, as they well should be and would be. But we are starting to see a lot of that gridlock that I think we were hoping to work through over the course of this week. And if you have not yet, and I'll bring it up in a little bit, there were a lot of impassioned speeches on the House floor yesterday, and I'll bring up one specifically when we get to a future slide. But there are some bills that have been introduced that we're working on, just to give you a heads up. Senate Bill 1114, PRLA partnered with Senator Hughes on this legislation. It has bipartisan support in the Senate. It essentially says that insurance companies need to pay out business interruption insurance. We did a press conference with the senator and a number of other senators on Monday. We've been doing a lot of social media pushes, PR pushes. This legislation is more or less kind of our wanting to let everybody know, and I said this last week, in a time of crisis when insurance companies could have done something, they did nothing. We absolutely know if insurance companies pay out 100% of business interruption insurance, they would not be solvent anymore. But they could have done something, and they didn't. So Senator Hughes, and we have members in the House as well, we're really trying to draw attention to that point, just to further the discussion that in a time that businesses needed help more than ever, they weren't there for us. So that is really the emphasis behind that legislation. Second to that is Senate Bill 1116, sponsored by Senator Killian. This is for all of my renters out there who cannot pay your rent and have gotten default letters and hate letters from your landlords over the past 2 weeks. This would delay the payment of rent for 90 days. You could not be evicted. Further to that, and I talked about this last week, it would eliminate any late fees and would also ensure that you don't default on your lease. The last thing we want is to say you can't be evicted, then at the end of 90 days, your landlord comes back and says you're in default and tries to negotiate a higher rate. And then long awaited, so you could start calling your local governments, Act 15 was signed by the governor. It was previously Senate Bill 841. The governor did sign it. This is that property tax pushback. So this doesn't eliminate property taxes. It doesn't freeze property taxes. The House did take a crack at that this week to try and freeze them for you this year. It didn't happen yet. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of pushback on it, but this does allow that delay. So reach out to your local governments. This allows the early payment to be pushed back to August 31st and full payment to be pushed back to December 31st. Those aren't hard and fast numbers. Local government can work around those dates. But it does give them the opportunity to push it back. There did need to be state legislation to allow them to do that. So that passed this week. Next week, the House is in session for 3 days. The Senate has been coming back every week. And I think the House has said they will be back every week. We're starting to enter the land of budget numbers. So we'll be working through all of that as well. So please stay tuned as we work through our legislative priorities. Next slide. All right, liquor legislation, the good and the bad and the ugly of trying to get thoughtful legislation passed. I'll start with the legislative stuff and then we'll get into a few other things. Bills on the move. Yesterday, House Bill 1279, sponsored by Representative Natalie Mihalik, got second consideration in the House and could get final passage in the House next week. This legislation increases the quantity that a wine expanded permit holder, a wet holder, can sell to go from 4 bottles to 12 bottles. So it gives you that case sale on wine. That, like I said, got second consideration, so the House should pass it next week, and then it will go to the Senate for consideration. So we're not there yet, but that has been a priority that we're trying to get across the finish line. Second item, bills that should be on the move. Yesterday, there were a number of amendments filed to kind of an innocuous liquor bill, and one of them was one that I know you all follow our social media, it definitely helped restaurants. And it was sponsored by Representative Kurt Masser, who himself is a restaurant owner, a business owner of 40 years. And that amendment very specifically, and it's very well written because he's a restaurant owner, allowed restaurant owners that have lost more than 25% of business due to the crisis to obtain a spirits expanded permit just during the course of the crisis. Recognizing the fact that if you are open and you're doing takeout, you're probably operating at 20% of your former sales, and just trying to drive revenue to you in any way possible, also while giving you consumers more opportunities to acquire spirits, because we'll get to this in a second. The LCB isn't doing so good a job just because of their shutdown over the past month. That amendment didn't fail, but it did not run just because of the politics that are in play within the legislature right now. And it's especially frustrating when you have a legislature that every single one recognizes what our industry is going through and says they want to help, and then they have an opportunity and they don't. We are not done pushing for this, but I will say, if you go to Representative Masser's his Facebook page, he did a truly epic speech on the House floor yesterday, not relating to this liquor bill, but just kind of about what restaurants, the frustration regarding operations and the federal loans. And it really is, if you want to know if there's a legislator who gets it, he does. So I urge you to take a look at that, because it really kind of gives you hope that there are people out there who understand what you're going through, and he's one of them. So we're not giving up on that. We're going to take another crack at it next week, in addition to other things such as delaying you having to renew your permits and licenses through the LCB. Other LCB updates. This is kind of the week of LCB, good, bad, and ugly. Just as an FYI, the Bureau of Licensing did send out an email to licensees this week. It was purely an FYI email saying licensees can now sell hand sanitizer. But the way it opened, if you are a licensee who's selling food products or grocery items, you kind of said, oh, are they saying I can't do this anymore? We talked to the LCB. They didn't think about it when they wrote it because they weren't even thinking about how it could be misinterpreted. But all that email is just you can sell hand sanitizer. It was not an admonishment on you selling any other type of items during the crisis. So if you get that email and if it kind of made your heart stop for a minute, that's all it was. It was just an FYI on the hand sanitizer front. Further on the LCB land of changes, and I know I always say that I'm going to try and be less snarky, but it doesn't happen. On Monday, the LCB started curbside pickup, and it's an extension to the online sales. So they started doing online sales, and then on Monday they started doing curbside. Unfortunately, the LCB website doesn't allow you to just go on and place an online order and pick it up at the store like every other retailer of the century allows you to do. So what they are attempting to do, and God bless the state store clerks who are doing the best they can, is that if you can get through to a store, you tell them what you want, they'll call you back and let you know if they have it. Upon that point, they either have it or you don't, and you need to change your order. But essentially, it's kind of a 4 to 5 call process if you can even get through to access product. About, I think, 200 stores have opened. The goal is to get 400 stores open to allow curbside pickup to be a little bit easier for everybody. They're working through it. Pro tip, for whatever reason, on Monday when they started doing curbside, I went on the LCB site and the online portal worked. So if you are a consumer and you don't need wine or spirits, as a business owner can't do this, but if you're a consumer and you need it, you can go to the online site, because I was able to get through on Monday, which, trust me, I've been trying a few times every day. So that started on Monday. That will expand. The other big announcement this week, and I gave a hint of this on the webinar last week, and I really have to give the LCB, it took a little while longer than we wanted, but they really worked with us, and their wholesale operations team really worked with us in an effort to get SLO orders open for licensees. And we've been working with them on this for about a week and a half on a plan. So for WEP holders only, if you have been selling wine out the door without a WEP permit, I don't want to know about it, but for WEP holders only, you are able to start placing special liquor orders through Loop. Few process notes. You should have gotten an email, but I'll go over it right now. If you do not have a licensee service center as one of your pickup places, you need to change in Loop your pickup spot for product to a licensee service center if you want to obtain wine via SLO. Upon doing that, and today, beginning today, actually last night especially, you should be able to start placing your orders to your vendors through Loop. So that begins today. This is just that you have to get it perfect and the vendors need to get it perfect. Tomorrow, your vendors will be delivering your orders to a state store. There is no limit on the orders. You can order as much as you want. They do have to be shrink wrapped, just so the LCB can hand them over, but there is no limit on what you can order. Those will be delivered to the state store tomorrow, Thursday. You would pick them up on Friday. You would get a call from the state store. You would be assigned a pickup time. This will happen, ideally, I'm sure this week's going to get a little rowdy, 2 times a week. So the same process would occur next week. Monday, you place your order. Tuesday, it's delivered. Wednesday, you pick it up. That's how they're envisioning it working. You can only pick it up from a licensee service center. You can get as much as you want, but you can only get SLO at this point. You cannot get listed items, and it is only for web holders. So that has started. I'm sure we're going to have some hiccups, but at least we have something, and you should be able to start accessing product. So that is starting. Like I said, you should be placing your orders today. Your vendors did get very specific information on what they need to do, and of course, we will continue to help you and bang the drum as we move forward. Next slide, and I'll try and make it quick because I know I'm getting a lot of questions. Philadelphia. Philadelphia. We have had really good conversations with members of council. There is some push to expand the Families First Act, the federal level, to apply to all businesses in Philadelphia, in addition to expanding it permanently to all businesses in Philadelphia. So currently it's if you're 500 employees or less, you're covered by the Families First Act for it to be reimbursable. 500 employers or more, you're not, because the assumption is that you're already providing these benefits. There is some legislation being discussed that would make something like that permanent regarding the paid sick leave, which Philadelphia already has, but also the paid family leave, making all of that permanent. And of course, you would not be reimbursed because it's Philadelphia. That legislation is circulating. PRLA has made it very clear that the last thing we need is further constraints on businesses, and we'll be working with council on that. But this is just what we've kind of learned to expect in Philadelphia, and we'll be pushing hard in terms of trying to get them to understand that when our members are closed and borderline bankrupt and some won't reopen, maybe another mandate on business isn't the best idea right now. Further to that point, in Allegheny County, they have introduced a paid sick leave bill in council this week. It's verbatim the same as Pittsburgh's. We have sent a letter essentially saying the same things. Our industry is decimated, and introducing a bill at this time is not the right time, so we'll continue to work on that as well. So I totally get what local government is doing. They're trying to do the right thing, but this is really a time that our industry can't afford government, tapping into us anymore, especially when we're not even open. So we'll continue to get the word out to all of you in those areas on how you can engage if we think this is really a threat that we need to proceed with. And also, some cities and municipalities are delaying permit or license renewals, and a lot of them are not. So Philadelphia is one of them that is not delaying any of those renewals. So I urge you to pay attention to those in terms to avoid late fees. And like I said, some are being delayed, some aren't. On the property tax front, please pay attention to that. Also on the local front, there are some governments and counties that are doing some small business loans. Those are starting to be rolled out. I know loan is like the F-bomb at this point because no one needs another loan. You need grants. But there are loan options that are being circulated out there at some counties. And as I said, please pay attention to your county and local websites because that will have a lot more specific information about where you're located. And with that, I think John has a few more things to cover. And then I will try and weed through some of these questions. Eric?
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Appreciate that. Great update. There's a lot going on, a lot to keep track of, and thankfully we've got somebody like Melissa who can keep it all straight. Thank you for that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the Hospitality Assistance Response of Pennsylvania, HARP. This is the fund that we set up to get grants to displaced or struggling hospitality workers within Pennsylvania as a part of the PRLA Educational Foundation. We continue to receive donations. Just as I got on the call today, we received another donation from a state banking organization. We appreciate that. And we're going to be opening the grant process for probably a short period of time to take some applications and begin to get some money out shortly. And I think it says right there when it's opening. And then the grant committee will make sure that we get money into the hands. If you know any foundations that are trying to help displaced workers, there's none that are struggling more than hospitality workers right now. Please have them reach out to us. The website is up here now, and they can reach out to any member of the team directly too if they need to talk with us. Hope Sterner and Heidi Howard are taking the lead on this event. Heidi's working with the development committee to try to raise more money. We appreciate everybody's support of that. Second one is, and you're familiar with our site, carryoutpa.com. This is the site where restaurants can get listed to ensure that people know they're available for either carryout or delivery. We've gotten a lot of publicity on this week. The governor mentioned it in one of his press releases. We appreciate that. And we've had a lot of press coverage of it as well. We're trying to make sure that we can drive as much business to restaurants that are trying to do takeout and delivery as possible. The public is definitely wants restaurant meals. We've talked to a number of our restaurant operators whose to-go sales are really doing well relative to what they've done in the past. Certainly it can't sustain a business, but there's a lot of uplift in that. So please, if you're not already on Carryout PA, get on Carryout PA. It's a very slick, well-done site. And if you're a consumer, go to Carryout PA and order from your restaurant. Order from your restaurant, go either pick it up, have it delivered, and buy gift cards. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Melissa.
Okay, let me try and work through some questions here. Melissa just noted if we have received P3 funding, we have 10 days to start using the funds, but the blueprint for recovery document from the NRA was in John's email update, noted the 8-week loan period begins the date the lender makes the loan disbursement to the borrower, which is correct. We just received our funding and are unsure when the clock starts. So the Treasury initially provided no guidance on this. So our hope and our directive, I think it was 2 or 3 updates ago, was to ask your bank to not disperse the loan until May 5th, which is kind of the last date you can start using it. Unfortunately, Treasury has since said that the loan needs to be dispersed within 10 days of it being funded. So you have 10 days from it being funded that you have to use it. It's not just when it's dispersed. The bank is required under law to disperse it within 10 days. A lot of them are saying 5 days. The federal guidance says 10.
So Melissa, is that to say they have to use it during the 8-week period beginning when they receive the money on that 10th day?
They have, yes. So let's say you get it Monday and the bank gives it to you Friday, you have to start using it on Friday.
They have 8 weeks to use it, essentially.
8 weeks from that Friday. So your clock begins that Friday, your 8-week clock.
In order to get forgiveness and
in order to get forgiveness.
Following all the rules, of course.
Yep. Do you have to test everyone in the restaurant every day for 14 days if there's an infection, or just the employees in contact with the infected person? I'm pretty sure it's everybody within the business has to be tested for 14 days straight when they come in. If there is an infection, let me clarify again, only if there's an infection. That is not something that you have to do right now. There has to be an infection first. There is, if you scroll through it, some options relating to some mask options. Thank you everybody for getting that information on there. That is awesome.
Melissa, pardon me. By tested, I think what you mean by tested is take their temperature before they enter the building. If you've had that case, right. That's the test we're talking about. We're also going to, it might be up on the site already. If it isn't, we're going to be providing hopefully some sources for thermometers too, because this seems to be another thing that's of short supply right now. Thanks, Melissa.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if for the self-employed, if you ask to be notified by email, will they get their PIN by email? I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because I would say possibly, but Pennsylvania's unemployment law applies to regular workers, not self-employed. So there is no state standard. So for all of you that had to wait and get your PIN in the mail, that's because state law dictated you had to get your PIN in the mail. But because this isn't that, there is an opportunity. I would presume that they will email that to you. And I would assume that would be on their website, but I do not know off the top of my head. It would make sense. But a lot of things make sense to me and they don't happen. So some more good mask things. This is great. This means I don't have a lot of questions. Somebody is in support of the insurers, the way they've handled it. Thank you for that. We are in support of pushing back on the insurers as well. There's a link to Representative Mosser's speech in there if anybody wants to see that. Regarding current discussions on insurance for this pandemic, would you recommend businesses file a claim with their carrier, which currently would be denied, which would allow them to have something on file in the event insurance companies are mandated to pay out? Either way, it has been suggested that you should file the claim because then at least you're in the system. If there is a federal recovery package, I don't think that you're going to be blocked out of it if you haven't filed a claim yet. But if you do file a claim, you'll probably get your funding quicker. So I don't think it hurts to at least get it in there and get in the queue on that front. But there is no yes or no answer to that. It's more of just get, like, same with the P3 loans. Get your name in the queue so when the money's available, you can access it. Let's see. Does the association have any comment on the study out of China that the CDC posted about air conditioning and air systems spreading the virus? This is very scary and makes our situation worse. I do not know. I've not heard of that, John. Have you heard anything about that?
I have heard the report, but no, I don't know anything enough about it to have a comment at this point in time.
I would say that if this is a threat, we'll be hearing about it from the CDC and from our Department of Health if this is an issue, because you're right, that would be an issue. HARP is for employees in need, right? Yes. Yes, HARP is for employees in need due to the crisis. Yes. Filing the claim also fulfills it. Let's see. And I think I am at the end of the questions. Hope will let me know if I missed one. And we're putting the HARP stuff back up there.
I don't think you missed anything.
I'm on a roll today.
I know. You've got you know what everybody wants to hear.
At the end, you can say hi to Macy. Say hi, Macy.
Oh wait, we got a new message.
Got a new one.
Oh, one more message.
What do you think the chances of the 8 weeks of forgiveness for P3 being extended? We brought this up before, and I'll continue to say it because despite all of this, I try to have faith in people. I think that it will look silly if Congress gives this funding for 8 weeks and then after 8 weeks, because you can't open, you have to put your employees on unemployment. It defeats the entire purpose. So I do think that there's two things here. Yes, I think that they'll have to fund it more. I think they'll have to extend the 8 weeks. On the other end of it, we have, and this is the politics that we're going to be getting into, we do have some people in Congress, some Democrats that want to extend that extra $600 till the end of September. which then makes your lives even more difficult in terms of if you get the extension, getting your employees back or keeping them on. So I think they'll do the right thing. I do, but we are going to be in a political fight over the next few weeks over this. But I think that it will be embarrassing if people have to go back on unemployment. So I would like to think that either through the P3 or some business interruption or some other funding, they will find a way to avoid that. So if you receive the funds, best to hold until we know we can open. If you have received the funds and you're taking them, you need to use them within 10 days of the bank release, or the bank has to release them to you within 10 days, and then you need to use them. That the feds could change that, and they should change it. But as of right now, if you receive the funds, you have to start using them once you receive them. So if you got them today, your 8-week clock starts today to start bringing employees back and meeting the forgiveness requirements of the loan. Like we said, this is for the loan to be forgiven, not necessarily if you want to use it just as a loan. And as I said, it's another conversation with your bank, what would be forgiven and what wouldn't. I received a worksheet for loan forgiveness from my accountant. There are mentions of both full-time equivalents and employee headcount. Are they the same or separate calculations that would impact loan forgiveness? It's a combination of both. You have to bring back the same full-time equivalent employees that you had this time last year for loan forgiveness, in addition to hitting that requirement of bringing back your employees as well. So it's kind of a two-prong checkbox that has to be. You have to bring back full-time equivalent and your regular employees as well. If you bring back everybody part-time, you won't hit the FTE requirement for loan forgiveness. As a visitor center, sharing guidance for best practices, keeping our employees safe and visitors. Oh, thank you, Paul. That is something we'll pass that along for Heidi for the next DMO call. I signed the documents and got funding the same day. Is 10 days from this point, or because it got funded the same day my clock is now? Our understanding is that when the money hit your bank account, that was day one. You got to ask your bank, though. Like I said, I am not the decider of your loan forgiveness and loan use. Your bank is going to be the decider of that. So our understanding is that once it hits your bank account, you're at day one of the 8-week clock. But talk to your bank. They're going to be the ones that might give you a different answer or give you some wiggle room. I like when John nods his head when I talk, because I feel like I'm giving the right answer then.
You can always give the right answer.
I'm trying.
I agree with Melissa, by the way, about this concept of extending the 8 weeks. And we've talked to a small number of Pennsylvania legislators from Washington who have all said the same thing. That said, unfortunately, you can't count on that for loan forgiveness, as Melissa said. So don't wait around if you're intending to get it forgiven to see if it gets extended. And then, as Melissa said, and checking your bank documents. That's what governs all this. You can't always convert it to a loan as long as it's still used for the appropriate purposes, which is 75% payroll and 25% those other things. But I wouldn't wait around to see what happens, even though everybody we've talked to seems to agree with Melissa. It needs to be extended. Nobody anticipated there's going to be they thought they'd flip a switch on and we'd all go back to work. Everybody now knows that was wrong, and that's why it should be adjusted. Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah. Should I give it another minute or two, Hope?
Yeah, we're nearing that noon time, so the cutoff.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for checking in with us again this week. And as always, email either Melissa or me or both anytime. And we spend most of our evenings trying to figure out how to get back to everybody, but we'll do our best. And in many cases, even call and chat with you. So that's what we're here for. So our number one role now is to try to be there when you have questions and to make sure that everybody can come out of this in some form or fashion. So with that, Melissa, great work again. Thank you. Thank you, Hope, for facilitating, and all the rest of the PRLA team.
Just real quick, it is recorded and we will be putting it up on our website as we do every week. So you will be getting an email if you've signed up for this from Eric with the recording too. So you will get it if you missed the beginning, no problems. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week.
Macy says bye too.
Bye, Macy.